Thank you, Catherine, and thank you all that have remained here till the end of the symposium for this last panel. I'm John Chiaffi from Stanford. I've spent about half of my career in industry working as kind of basic design engineer all the way up to I was CEO of a company with about 150 people for 10 years. But the other half has been at Stanford, where I'm in the digital communications area. So happy to be here today. We had a little practice call kind of on Tuesday for this, and so we have a question that we're going to go down the line and introduce ourselves and then give a response to that particular question. We'll go from there, and we're certainly going to try to leave time at the end here for questions from the audience as well. So the question is here, what is the biggest impediment that you see today to innovative communications area university researchers, inventions and/or efforts scaling appropriately and finding use in next generation communication systems? So that's kind of thought. What do you see as the biggest obstacle that you have to overcome in order to get the research into commercialization? So with that, we're going to start with Dimitra, who will introduce herself and provide an answer, and we'll just go down the line here, and then we'll begin with more questions to follow.
Great, thank you very much. I have already introduced myself in one of the previous panels, but I'm Dimitra Simeonidou from University of Bristol, and actually my relationship to the UK 6G landscape is that I'm the PI of a large project called Reason, which is collaboration between academia and industry to actually rethink or think benchmark architectures for 6G. And the second one, I'm also leading one of the initiatives as part of the telecoms hubs that many times they have been mentioned, and that is I'm the PI of the Joiner project, which is delivering a national testbed for experimentation and 6G innovation. So that is my 6G thing. Your question, yes, I read it quite a few times. So to try make sure, and I came up with 5 points, which I go through very quickly. The first one is the right collaborative environment across academia and industry. And when I say the right collaborative environment, first, the right funding model across, because I believe that this is very important. Industry and academia, they have to be appropriately motivated to go to the collaboration, and also equity in the relationship. It's not industry tells academia what to do, it's how we can develop that intellectual equity across. The second one, which I thought that's a big problem in the UK, I don't know what is elsewhere, is talent. We find it very difficult to bring talent inside the UK. Geopolitics and immigration rules, it makes it exceptionally difficult. So because we are working also in short time scales, if you have 2 years project, you actually consume 6 to 12 months to bring the right people in. So that is another important one. And when we are talking about outcomes, I can see 2 impediments there. The one is the culture, because most academics we see as our culture to produce papers, to publish papers, which is of course a very good thing, but there is less actually acceptance on culture on IP and standards. Sometimes it's being considered as substandard academic intellectual output and not equal to, for instance, publishing in an IEEE journal. And that is tied up to the fact that if you have outputs that they're commercializable, for instance, we don't have around us the right investment environment. So there is not actually a motivation that I have a patent, I have a prototype, I can actually find a place to commercialize it, and that is a very big barrier. So I said 4 rather than 5. I leave the 5th for later.
Okay, we'll let you surprise us with that later.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Hans Schotten. I'm a professor at the University of Kaiserslautern and scientific director at the German Research Center for Artificial Intelligence. And actually, I also have the pleasure to coordinate the umbrella project of the German 6G program, the 6G platform Germany. John, to your question, so I completely agree with all points that Dimitra had. That's where I can make it simple. I have two additional points. One is telecommunication systems have a pretty high maturity, which actually means these systems are already optimized for many, many years. They are complex. They depend on standards from many bodies. So actually you need to have a very broad system engineering competence and probably many people in order to understand everything. And given the high maturity, we are talking about optimization. And that makes it very simple for our smaller companies, for startups to enter this field. And it also makes it simple to educate at the university everything that you need to know, because at least in Germany, we have an increasing lack of industry experienced professors. Yeah, so in the past, that was much better. So that's one thing. The second topic is scalability. So we are pretty good in the 6G program in Germany to initiate startups. However, we have, and you already touched the topic, a little bit of problem with the willingness to really scale up. Yeah, so to fight hard, not to just got sold, so any kind of exit strategy very early and take 1 million, but to wait until you get 1 billion. And only when you are really willing and eager to get for the 1 billion, you have a strategic impact. And that is a cultural thing that I don't know whether it's a typical German or a European or even international issue. Okay, thank you.
I think it's global, and so we have the legacy and scalability from you.
Hi everyone.
Holger, yeah.
I'm Holger Clausen. I'm leading Tyndall's Wireless Communications Laboratory. I have one here. And Tyndall is Ireland's national lab, and I'm also professor of wireless communications at University College Cork and Trinity College Dublin. And prior to joining academia, I was my whole technical career over about 20 years in Bell Labs and industry. And one thing, seeing both sides, industry and academia, one thing I'm noticing sometimes that there is a disconnect in terms of the problems that are seen as important. So industry focuses on what makes sense for the customers that they're working with. So the industry has a very clear handle on what are important problems that make money, that change the lives of customers and users of the technology. On the other hand, in academia, I've seen often that the objective or the research topics are very much driven by search for novelty, sometimes for novelty's sake. And so it happens that researchers solve problems that are simply not important in the big picture. And that makes it much harder to then later translate that into impact. And I think the key is really to collaborate closely together with industry to learn about what are the important problems to be solved. And then basically it's a win-win situation for both industry and academia. So more impact for academia, and industry benefits from some of the more theoretical approaches that academia brings and some of the fundamental insights.
Okay, all right. So really, the research focus and what, how is that identified and pursued? So Deepa, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Deepa Venkatesh. I am a professor in the Electrical Engineering Department in the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras. I work in the domain of optical communication, and I lead a test bed, which is called the Advanced Optical Communication Test Bed, funded by the Department of Telecommunication. And this is a unique test bed where there's 50% involvement by the industry. By involvement, I mean the government has funded 50% of the funds to the industry. And there are 3 academic institutes, and between us, we have several work packages where we work with the industry for either indigenization of a existing product, or it could be research towards a futuristic technology. So this is a new model which is coming up, and I'm glad that the ministry has placed trust in us on this. Coming to the question, I have not worked in industry, so with my limited experience with interaction with the industry in terms of what they need, I think the first problem is that our timelines of where we expect the outcomes are very different. Typically for a PhD research, at least in India, it takes 4 years, and industry wants problem to be solved in a very short time. And at least in the industry that I have involved with, there's no long time patience that, for the futuristic developments, at least in India that I've seen. The other problem is, it's actually related to the first one. I'll borrow the definition of research from the provost of Cambridge in the morning, that there is blue sky and there is applied. And what is applied to industry, the timelines are very short, right? So that's the same thing. The second issue I feel is that the IP clauses are not very clear, and it's quite muddy. And I would actually second what Dimitra said, that academic research in good institutes do not consider patent as a valuable PhD output, right? So that perception also has to change. So these are the 2 points I will say, and rest for later.
Okay, thank you. So kind of the near term versus long term, but you've brought in also important point of funding and what does that actually fund? And I'm sure we're going to come back to that here on this panel. Go ahead, Jasper. You are our one representative, not necessarily from academia here. So, from a government perspective, why don't you tell us about that, and maybe you're going to be able to help us here on the funding questions that are arising.
Thank you. I'm the odd one out amongst a row of professors. So I'm Jasper Panzer. I work in the Advanced Communications Technologies unit in DCIT. There I look after our international collaborations and also after our engagement in technical standards development. Addressing the exam question, I'd like to respond by saying that providing the right environment for innovation and the right environment to successful commercialization is very important to us in DCIT. Advanced communications and connectivity is fundamental to society, the economy, and security as well. So we want to make the right investments now to make sure that we realize the benefits that we want in a decade's time. We in DCIT, we have made investments in recent years in R&D. We will continue to make those investments. And where there are barriers and obstacles to commercialization and innovation, we'd be keen to better understand those and then work with you to address them. So it was useful to hear the points already from the panelists thus far on skills, on a mismatch between industry and academia. So I think these are all important points that we should look at closer and pick up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I have a mic here. Good morning, or is it evening? I don't know. It was 11 hours to travel here, so I'm quite sure in which time zone I'm in. Ari Pottu from University of Oulu, Finland. I'm professor in dependable wireless communications, especially looking at different verticals, not really ICT itself. I'm also the vice director of our 6G flagship program in Finland, and the scientific PI of our 5G test network, so similar to what Dimitra has in Bristol, we have also in Oulu some similar system set up. As for the question, Finnish president always wants to crystallize his message in 3 points. So his points were Russia, Russia, Russia. Mine is resilience, resilience, resilience. Why? I mean, in many other countries, resilience means cost, right? You need to build something which is not necessarily always necessary. And now we are talking about that building things that we need rarely, if ever, hopefully never. But now still we are talking about resilience. Why? Well, I come from Finland, and guess who is our neighbor? it's a resilient country. And they are, for instance, interfering our networks, interfering air traffic. So we take this opportunity in Finland also in research to look at resilient structures, resilient systems, resilient society. So that's, after 6G flagship, one of the things that we are really going to do in a big way in Finland, looking at resilient solutions. Thanks.
Okay, so resilience there. I had a list too, but you guys got most of my list. I'll add one more that I've noticed here as being kind of one of very few Americans here at this particular event. But people have asked me questions about it, and they seem surprised by the answer. You may or may not be aware that I probably know 50 or 60 venture capitalists in Silicon Valley. None of them will invest in telecom infrastructure. I'm not talking about the apps on your phone, and they haven't for 20 years. And the reason for that is the return on the investment is poor. And there are reasons for that are endemic to the industry that have to do with the bureaucracy or the stagnancy and so forth, and how when they invest in those areas, they lose their money because it doesn't. Even if it's commercialized, they don't get a return on that. Is a point. So that's one more that I'll add to the list here for us to discuss as we go forward. Okay. Well, one of the one area that kind of came up here, and I haven't been present for every one of the presentations, but I think that we could add here on this particular panel is on the area of the funding and the near term versus the long term. On our call Tuesday, we had this issue of like matching funding from industry, and it was controversial. Some were in favor of it, some were not in favor of it. So I'd like to throw that out as one of the ways to deal with the near far or deal with the collaborative issues that we've raised across the group, and let any of you who might want to go on that. I know, Deepa, you mentioned a number of different initiatives that are somewhat new in India to try to address that, so you might want to start, but we should have everyone kind of weigh in on this particular area.
Sure. So, okay. So one of the initiatives is by the Department of Telecom. It is called the Telecom Technology Development Fund. I think you heard in one of the talks earlier. So let's take an example of a transceiver, right? Let it be a 10 gig transceiver or 100 gig transceiver. It's fairly low in terms of, high in terms of volume, but low in terms of the level of technology, you may say. But the question is, in India, we import every transceiver that we use. So the question is, okay, do we have the capability to build a transceiver? Do we have the stomach to make manufacturing? And the answer is actually yes, we do have the capability and we could manufacture, but there is a certain amount of R&D that is required to reach up to that stage. Now, when we started the testbed project, I did talk to a lot of industry in India. And the reason why they don't want to get into it is because of the cost, right? They wouldn't be able to sell it. They're guaranteeing quality, but they won't be able to sell it at the cost that they're able to import it from somewhere, right? So that's where the government came in and said that they would subsidize the R&D costs, or in some cases, give 100% of the R&D costs and get it to a point where it is not a prototype, it's a TRL9 level product to get it to that point. And in our testbed, there are 2 or 3 products identified that way, very carefully chosen, where there is volume so that we would be able to make a difference. And that is, I think, fantastic. And we really hope that this takes off the way it is intended to.
Let me just follow on that. You're saying the Indian government has this nice program that kind of takes you to the point where it involves some execution beyond the innovation. And of course, that's investors typically, venture capitalists again, they invest in execution, not innovation, right? They want to get it to a certain point, but they expect a return on it. It's interesting that the government is kind of assuming that particular function. What happens then? Who gets the return at that point? Because presumably it's now ready to be scaled into large manufacturing. It's going to one of the big equipment vendors or software vendors of some type. So how is that handled, that last step, and you know, who's going to get a reward for that? Is it the government? Is it the inventors? Both, or someone else?
So the IP and the return clauses are very clear in this program, and so what you generate is the IP, and the IP is owned by the person who is funded. And there's a clause that if you do not monetize that IP over a certain period, I don't remember whether it's 2 years or 3 years, the government takes over.
Okay, that sounds like an excellent program. Actually, Stanford University has a program like that as well. Where
We did look at
they'll
that,
invest
yeah.
about $5 million of cash into a spin out from the university up to a point where they expect to get a return. So I'm glad to see that India is doing that as well. Are there other responses?
So maybe I can give the Irish perspective. So in Ireland, when collaborating with industry, there are a couple of different engagement models. So either fully funded models when industry wants to own the IP. That typically ends up quite expensive because there are higher margins charged and so on. And for some of the longer term research, it's then very risky for industry. And so for the longer term and more exploratory research, there is the possibility to collaborate through the research centers funded by Research Ireland. And they provide basically a 50% fund matching. And so that makes it much more cost effective, and also the margins added are much lower there. So it's a lot cheaper for industry to engage with universities through these models, but then there are other strings attached in terms of IP ownership. So in that case, basically the university would own the IP. But if it's exploratory research and the primary aim is to maybe train people that the companies would like to hire later, this is a very good model, and we use it quite often.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
I'm not going to talk about UK funding landscape strengths, because I like very much the European model and the way that Europe actually nurtures research and innovation, because we have to realize that one model does not work for everybody. As you said, it really very much depends on the stage of the R&D. If you are doing fundamental research, then it's better to decouple the PI from industry, and being the PI's choice if they want to engage with industry at one point. So in Europe, there is the European Research Council that really recognizes excellence and PI and research excellence, and then they fund the PI with no constraints, no expectation for industry. And then, of course, you have the collaborative projects, Horizon, in our case, SNS programs, and we all know those. But what I like in these programs is that equity in funding between academia and industry. And the thing is that sometimes we say, oh, but industry should match fund. And yes, big industry probably should match fund, but it's the SMEs. And SMEs being paid 100% or close to 100% to work with academia is impossible, because small companies, they cannot match fund, but they can gain quite a lot of the R&D capacity that comes actually from academic collaboration, and that's important to support and to nurture. And then, of course, the European Innovation Council. Has anybody have any grant from European Innovation Council here? They are absolutely wonderful, because the thing is that if you have something that is ready to commercialize, you can put a European Innovation Council grant proposal, and they can support you from an early stage to what they call accelerator, all the way to scale up. So what they do, significant amount of funding, so you don't get into the loop to give a lot of your equity into venture capitalists. At the same time, they provide to you from the European Investment Bank a facility. You don't need to use it, but you can use the facility to invest in your company. And you can take this all the way from a very small initial spin out all the way to scale up of a company the 1 billion that you said, you don't actually being forced to sell out. You just get value into your company at the point that you would like to go out.
Is there a maximum?
Sorry?
Is there a maximum on the European program you're talking about in terms of investment?
They just announced it. I don't remember what it is, but it's multiple tens of millions that they actually, but the thing is, it's a facility. So you can take as much as you want.
And they own equity? Or they just...
No, there's no
There's no strings, okay.
There's no strengths in that. It's really building up commercial value into Europe. By the way, the UK can actually participate in the seed funding and the accelerators, but we cannot go further. We can't go to scale up and further than that. But it's an exceptionally good model. And for my colleagues that they're part of the EU, I think it's a good way to be supported.
So maybe that brings us to you, Ari. What are your thoughts on this, especially given that you have the 6G Center at...
In Finland, we have quite similar situation that there is in Ireland. So if the company comes in and starts collaborative actions, 100% funding, IPRs are theirs. In case we want to do collaborative national projects, we have an instrument called Business Finland, where you get 70 to 80% of the funding with lower margin, obviously, and then 20% or 10% comes from the company. And similar rules, we own the IPR. So the situation is quite similar with Ireland in Finland.
So heading back to you, Jasper, as a lone representative, someone who funds this, do you have any thoughts to add?
So I recognize the importance of match funding and government being able to provide some match funding. So in the UK, we've got Innovate UK, who is the research funding agency who fund industry-led research, including on advanced connectivity technologies. I understand they provide match funding of 50% for large organizations and even a higher percentage for smaller organizations. So that facility exists. On the subject of IP, I'm not the expert, but I think my understanding is that Innovate UK are flexible and that they would like to see just a clear framework of how IP is being handled in the research that they fund.
Okay, that's good. I'll bring up another one that seems a little bit controversial, especially in the present date, and it has to do with kind of geopolitical challenges. But several of you specifically also brought up the issue of visas, or you put it as recruiting talent, but it takes a while to get a visa. So, how do you see that? Are there spheres of interest that are causing an issue, and do you see issues in terms of just immigration restrictions or difficulties in the in any of your research efforts, but in particular in this theme of trying to see it get used?
Yeah, so in Germany, we currently don't have significant restrictions. There are very, very few cases. Sometimes the administrative processes are a little bit slow, but okay. But we are afraid that might change. Yeah, and there are many ways how it can change. So we might get increasing restrictions on talents from certain countries. We might get restrictions that certain tools from specific countries cannot be used by researchers from other countries. So this is now popping up, in particular in the semiconductor topics, and that is a kind of a nightmare because we heavily depend on talents that we get from other countries, and some of them are on the list of those countries that shouldn't get supported from the perspective of one of the big supplier countries for microelectronic tools. Yeah, so we see that we are currently living in a really luxury world, but we see clouds.
Others want to comment on this area?
So in India, we do have this problem of visas, but not for recruitment, because all our best students want to go to you Europe or US. So if that visa is delayed, it's good for us. But jokes apart, we don't really want to hold students unwillingly. But the problem we face is when we have international collaborations. For example, I myself had a project which was involving Japan, Australia, and US. And the project ended without me sending anybody because the US visa takes a lot of time. And similarly, there was, of course, it was some kind of hangover after COVID as well. But in general, for even for exchange visits, it's not predictable. So we wouldn't be. We are typically faced with this problem that we are not able to keep up with the timeline because we expect a 2-month delay, but it is probably actually a 6-month delay or 8-month delay to actually get the visa processed. UK is one of the easiest visa that I could get. Yeah.
Okay. I think one of the areas also was the specifics of the type of funding that you think, whether this is 3-year long-term fellowships versus the typical company wants to fund each year and renew because they have more near-term performance objectives of the management that are approving the funding at that. So perhaps, and the near-term, long-term came up earlier with legacy as well. So maybe somebody wants to take that.
Well, I can say a few words.
Sure.
Starting with the 6G flagship. It was 8-year funding and started in 2018 and it ends 2026. So that program has had a huge impact in Finnish economy and also what happens in the 6G field nowadays. So that has been a really, really good program. Then we have 2-year programs, for instance, coming from Business Finland. And when you get the machine going and your locomotive is going fast, then you hit the wall, it's end. And yeah, I prefer in academia these longer term research projects, but on the other hand, what Holger said about these requirements coming from the industry, then you have to go for the short ones as well. But then you have to choose and pick the right topics for the short-term projects. And now, for instance, we are now entering 6G standardization. A couple of weeks ago, there was the first 3GPP meeting, so we academics need to think what's next. Our choice is resilience and trust for the AI and something on top of that. But we also are looking for yet another 8-year program or similar like that. But let's see what happens. It depends on, universities get funding, but it mostly goes for teaching, at least at Oulu, and most of the research is done on competed funding. So hopefully we get these long-term programs when you do these blue sky-ish system level kind of development work.
Right, longevity is essential. And I would like to give an example about our quantum program in the UK, which is actually running for more than 10 years now as a program and created actually hubs that they are the focus of excellence, not only nationally and internationally, and their funding, like yours, Ari, they have been renewed. And the importance of that is because you build sustained excellence and also sustain collaborations, nationally and internationally. Mm-hmm. And then probably you experience this with your flagship. When it comes to the academic collaboration, they feel more comfortable to collaborate, even if it is short-term mission-driven projects, to collaborate with an initiative that is having history and longevity. So it's a win-win situation. Cannot happen all the time. So in telecoms, for instance, we have been living with very short missions of funding, 18 months, 12 months, but you need to get to that long-term programs to reap the benefits.
So similar story from my perspective. So not a long time ago, an MNO approached me and said, okay, I urgently need a study, but the duration is max 3 months. But I need a lot of working power because we have a critical business decision that depends on the outcome of the study. So it would have been impossible to do this study and to support industry on this decision if we wouldn't have one of the German research hubs that provided me with the expertise and the staff. And the problem is you don't get anybody hired for 3 months. So I could simply pull them out of the staff pool that I have and help industry here. And then they continued in the hub. So these long-term research projects often enable that you can take these small industry projects that often have a certain level of urgency and deadlines and durations of 3 months in the worst case. Yeah? So the combination makes it possible. Industry projects of 3 or 6 months without having a larger long-term research hub in the background is almost impossible.
Any other takers on that?
I
Go ahead,
can
Deepa.
add. I think I agree with all the co-panelists that there has to be a steady long-term funding and also which trains the human resource to work on that so that we have a ready pipeline of students or researchers who could potentially work on the short-term requirements. So this consortium model, I've seen the Georgia Tech consortium earlier where there is a base that is set up, the base technology, knowledge base that is set up. The industry comes in with a specific problem. So because you have trained a stream of students, staff, it can be addressed. But there again, I understand that that's closed for whatever reason, but to sustain such consortia, to sustain such centers of excellence, that becomes the key. In India, we have the same National Quantum Mission. IIT Madras is leading the Quantum Hub for Communication. It's a 10-year program. We just started, and we are trying to see the same model to train, have a track of training and human resource, generation in that domain, whereas there will be short-term engagements with industry planned into the scheme.
Okay, and I think I got everybody's answer a little earlier on IP on this, but you're raising a very good point about this infrastructure in the university that has to be there, and there's most universities, there's billions of dollars that have gone into that infrastructure, and so somebody coming in with a $100,000 grant for a year or €100,000 grant for a year, expecting to own the IP is really leveraging a huge amount of other investment, and it's kind of an unfair request, but I suspect you've all have seen that or had that fight at your university on the IP with whatever company it was that was coming in to fund the one-year program there. So everybody's shaking their head yes on that.
Regarding the
Go-
IP, regarding the IP, one of the things that IIT Madras encourages is to transfer the IP on a non-exclusive basis, wherever feasible. If there is a disparity in the amount of investment that the industry has brought in versus the infrastructure, do it on a non-exclusive basis.
I see, okay. All right, well, I have some other questions here, but I think I'd rather open it up to the audience here because I think your questions are going to be better than mine are at this point. So if we have any takers on that, someone up in the back there.
I'm not sure it's exactly a question. There's more a couple of comments. First of all, Deepa mentioned about the visas are easier in the UK compared to some other countries. So this is Matthew Andrews from Nokia, and we hire interns in labs in multiple countries. And it does seem to be easier to bring interns into the UK. So I'd certainly like to thank the UK for making that easier. My other comment was actually related to what Holger was saying about the type of problems are maybe a little different in industry and academia, and maybe academia is motivated more by novelty. And I think we actually saw an example of that here. When yesterday people were asked about their favorite 6G topics, we heard things like Isaac, semantic communications, which are awesome topics. But then today we heard from Deutsche Telekom that 0-bit, 0-watt is like one of the most important challenges, which I don't think gets worked on so much in academia, and it's something we hear from all the operators. So I guess one perhaps rhetorical question is how can we get academia to work more on those type of problems, the more fundamental 0 bit, 0 watt, which are really hard. Maybe it seems like an obvious thing, turn it off when it's not being used, but actually doing it at the scale of a national network is really hard.
Yeah, I could answer this. So it's a little bit the point that I raised with the maturity. So the complexity of the telecommunication systems is in the meantime so high that academia sometimes simply doesn't understand all the details. So there are questions that are relevant for the MNOs that academia simply doesn't understand anymore. That's the issue of complexity, it's the issue of maturity, and an increasing lack of industry background in the professors, in the faculty.
But do you think that's different for Isaac, say? I mean, there's like a ton of professors working on Isaac.
Yeah, that's a different issue. That's an additional issue. So it's, of course, the academic education often is a little bit physical layer biased, and all these physical layer closed topics are driven from universities, while other topics often has lower priority. It's simply because telecommunication belongs to signal processing and physical layer traditionally, and for example, not to AI and computer science. And that's why it's much easier to drive things in this area from the physical layer. Also, industry always tells us the physical layer is not driving innovations anymore. So yes, there is it's an increasing gap between what academia wants to do and what the MNOs wants to get. Yeah? And that's painful. That is painful, and we have seen in many discussions here where people say, okay, this is not what the MNOs are looking for, and nevertheless it's done. Yeah? So I think this can be explained a little bit by the history of certain fields in academia.
So well, I might comment on this because in a couple of weeks, I just had to deal with this subject because I'm doing a keynote in a IEEE conference in a couple of weeks, and they gave me the title, which was From Academia to Commercialization. And what my response is, it's kind of reinforcing what you're saying, but I have this diagram where I have the university on one side, and I have industry on the other, and I have a big circle in the middle that I call the danger zone. And you enter the danger zone because from the academic standpoint, you're a hopeless practitioner. And who wants you? If you're a young professor, maybe you don't get tenure for that. And from the industry side, you look like a theoretical lunatic on that side because you're away. But someone told me this, an MIT professor, a long, long time ago. He said, when you're in the danger zone, rejoice, because it's very, very valuable to be there, even if everybody's criticizing you. So that would be my thought on bridging that gap. It takes a lot of courage for someone to go into that gap, whether they're coming from industry or coming from academia, to try to deal with exactly what you're talking about.
I would like to add there that we actually don't have the experts at the moment who could tackle the three things: wireless, AI, softwareization. Such persons do not exist. Well, maybe there are a few, I don't know.
They have the courage to make themselves into that, to enter the danger zone.
Exactly.
And do that.
What I'm not currently trying to hire a person who would like to be, well, I would like him to do or her to do is a AI algorithm that looks at your channel estimates and deploy it on software on your run intelligent controller at the edge.
It's a great project.
Yeah, and then I asked my guys, who can do this?
Maybe NVIDIA from this morning. I see you watching on now.
So what it basically means is that we need to renew our curriculum. Nowadays, we need to have wireless, AI, and softwareization. So computer science, data science, and telecommunications needs to have some kind of programs there.
Can I come on this? Because I agree with you. I'm working on that danger zone, and I'm rejoicing it. Because, you know, most of the academic practice, and I think my colleagues agree, it's practice which is happening either running a simulator on a computation facility or actually, you know, building a device in a lab. But as you say, the key actual problems that we are having are problems of integration, are problems of heterogeneity, are problems of end-to-end. We really need to understand, you know, how AI is going to work in a system, how security, where are security phases, how energy consumed in a system end-to-end, and so on. And up to now, we were saying we do our research, Matthew. We give the prototype to industry, and then a service provider or a vendor are going to trial this in system, under system conditions, and that's where the relationship has been. But may I note that quite a few of us have large-scale testbeds as part of our programs, and really the purpose of these large-scale testbeds is to be able, first of all, to put our prototypes in systems and look at system insights where would inform industry exactly on that areas that they are relevant to industry, but also they are quite big science problems. So system thinking into telecoms, we need to develop it, and we develop it through these test infrastructures. So this is quite important. The second one is that how we are going to create these people that you described, Ari, unless we put them to work in an environment where they are actually have to learn on the interface across computation and communications, across RF and your AI at the edge. You have to have an environment where we have to start training these people as academics.
Offer a fellowship or a research assistantship, and I think you'll get them to go into that danger zone. But Hans, you've been waiting to speak.
Yeah, so actually, the funny thing is that if you ask funding organizations that look at this from innovation management point of view, they say, yes, technology convergence, this is where key innovations are coming from. But when you then try to get proposals accepted that are in between, in the danger zone, yeah, they will realize, okay, this is the theoretical view on this, but it's extremely difficult to get it through the evaluation process. Yeah, so they know that they have to promote technology convergence, but they are not able to implement it.
So that is a culture thing that we discussed before, because convergence is never going to give you Nature papers.
Yeah, it's
Correct?
also a little bit a question,
That
of course, of how funding agencies,
Yeah.
etc., are organized.
But
I've had some of my
funding
proposals
agencies, they
rejected
just
too, but
funded
Jasper is
this
waiting to
program.
speak here, so why don't we let him speak about this?
John, you drew the picture of the academic interests and industry interests. I think there should be a third circle of what are the government interests. So I wonder if I can talk about now what we as DCIT see are our priorities when it comes to further innovation in the space. Because I think it's important, we are trying to keep the big picture in mind and think about what are going to be the societal benefits. What do the average citizen, what do they care about? What do we care about as government? And there's three things we are looking at specifically. One is digital inclusion, so making sure that technologies will help everybody wherever they are to be connected. And we've heard about some very promising technologies throughout today and yesterday. And the work that Titan is doing here to integrate those networks is also very relevant here. Secondly is security and resilience. Ari, you mentioned that. I think that's it's very important. I think clearly those technologies will be part of our national infrastructure in some years' time, and so we need to make sure that they are resilient and resistant to a number of threats. AI makes it easier in some ways, but also harder in other ways. And when it comes to resilience, a key element here remains a degree of diversification in supply chain. So we're keeping our eye on that as well.
That's a good point, and I may add a third circle to my my talk. I like the concept that you raised there.
And resilience, as I said, is costly. And if we let the vendors and MNOs of the world decide, it will never happen. So we need policy mandating it.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions from the audience? You see, just that one question got us going here. Now it's getting late on Friday, but we still have about 10 minutes before the quitting hour. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I missed that, Catherine. Go ahead.
And thank you very much. It was fascinating. I guess my question is maybe for Ari. You were talking about how your initiative in Finland has been funded for 8 years, and I think we all see the value of long-term funding for research. I think the challenge from a government perspective or a funding body perspective is, or partly the budgetary cycles that you work to, but also, obviously you're competing against funding for health research and for many other things.
Yes.
I'd really, if there's good evidence that we have in the telecommunications arena that we can share amongst this group who are here today of where long-term funding and research has really had an impact that might not have been possible without it, I think it might be helpful for all of the representatives in the room to see it. So I asked the question of you, but it's a sort of call to everybody really. If there's good evidence, that's always helpful to policymakers.
I have numbers, but I'm not sure if it's good evidence. So we've had on the side, over the 7 years now, 526 other projects which are part of the program. We've had 13 white papers which have been downloaded 1.1 million times. We have 150 PhD graduates. We have 4,000 scientific publications. We have X number of IPRs, I don't remember the number, it was somewhere between 1 and 200. We have, what else? Total number of collaborators is somewhere around 1,200. Academia 600, companies 500, and then these NGOs and governmental offices, maybe close to 100. So we have networked globally, and we have produced a huge number of results. And these are the only evidence that I can give you right out of my head now. And we have done some surveys among our customers, and yes, they see that constant, long program provides them also some. I mean, the portfolio is now so large that we are actually 550 people working in this program. So we can always find somebody to work on their problems. So maybe those kind of impacts are there. Startups, not too many. It's probably in Finnish culture, not too. There are maybe 5 or 6, but not too many.
I'll give an answer on this too. That's back to Jasper, that you made me think of. I haven't had a lot of government experience, but one experience I have is a famous guy, Vint Cerf. He's a friend of mine. He's like the father of the internet. And he invites me to this meeting with a bunch of politicians in Washington, and he's used to this because he kind of does like lobbying technically for Google. And we're in the room and we're trying to explain to this group about broadband and the $50 billion that the US government is subsidizing the build out of broadband with, and explain to them the long-term benefits of maybe collecting data through open interfaces and so forth, and evaluating long-term how that money is being spent. And we were both very frustrated because no one wanted to listen, because the thing that was driving the politicians was, I got $50 million for my district, okay, vote for me. And so there is an aspect of any democratic political system where the politicians want to get elected. And so if there are big pots of money available in programs, it's typically not long-term, it's short-term because they need to get elected. So that was kind of an unusual experience for me. It was a little bit of a negative experience. I didn't like it too much, but there was nothing I could say or do that would get them to think more long-term because they were just focused elsewhere.
Mike is with me.
Sure, you have the mic already.
Yes. Holger made an interesting point that in academia, as an academic I am speaking, we are very much driven by inquisitiveness and maybe quantitative analysis and so on, but the real problems are very complex. Most of the things we solve may be really not relevant to the real world and so on. That resonates with me very much. So given that is the dynamics, whether we like it or not, I would like to ask panelists if they want to comment. In your history of academic industrial collaboration, can you give an example which was very fruitful, very productive, and how was the dynamics, how come it turned out to be very high impact?
So maybe I can start. So about 20 years ago, it was, I mean, we've heard from the Ericsson presentation this morning that scaling capacity has continued over the decades. So every 10 years we have to scale capacity by 100-fold and do that for the same amount of money because we don't want to pay more for our mobile subscriptions. in roughly the same physical resources, because in the lower frequency bands we are limited. And then we know from Shannon, basically capacity scales linearly with the bandwidth, logarithmically with signal to noise ratio. So if you want to address capacity, you have to address the bandwidth part. And since bandwidth is limited, the only way of addressing it in these orders is by reusing the spectrum. So 20 years ago at Bell Labs, we focused on enabling small cells, and we had to solve a couple of fundamental questions there, especially how do you deploy these cells cost effectively, and fixing some of the architecture limitations at the time, which was then standardized by 3GPP. And so solving those problems at the time, we found about 100 patents in the area alone of making small cells plug-and-playable, self-optimizing, and at that time that was commercialized and was very successful. So, and today, if you look at the small cell market, it has grown to over 11 billion annually. So I think that is a good example of how research can have real world impact.
I love that answer, and especially the part with Shannon as well. So,
Well,
other question? I think
I have one example as well.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries. During the early days of my academic career, I worked quite a lot on military, defense force projects. And one of the examples include not just industrial and academic collaboration, but also societal, because we had companies, our university, and the Finnish Air Force involved in a project, which lasted for 10 years, 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, 3 years, something like this. And eventually the project came out. We designed it in our university, companies built it, and then we helped them analyze the results, and the outcome was the data link for the Finnish aircraft, the Finnish F-18 aircraft. So, and it was the first ever non-US electronic device to put a US war platform.
Excellent. You've got the mic. Okay, great. Whoever's got the mic.
Yeah, I think I got it. Thank you. In fact, my question is that I have not seen in most of the countries that academia is participating in standard. So perhaps whoever is funding, whether that's government or industry, so time has come that in academia has to participate in standard making process. So they have to attend those 3GPP meeting, or you name any, I mean, wherever that, because here a real challenge is that how academia can be entrepreneur, and it means risk. I think you have also given that. So even though professor may not form his own company, but definitely he can promote a startup. So I think we have to see the novel ways, and I think that's started happening in case of India, that a lot of professors, they have their own company as well, and that's a success model. And present one of the shortcomings, I realized that if like Olu University is being funded by 50% by academia and government and 50% by some XYZ agency or any one industry, so naturally they have to work for the industry. So yeah, how can, I mean, this is also one of the problems. So you have to be entrepreneur, sir, and make money. And that's come from standard only.
I have done that, but I would call that the danger zone. So I was an editor of a big US standard in the fixed line transmission area a while back. One of the problems I did find, though, was I had to do it. Asking the students to go to those meetings was a good way to get them to try to exit my group and go to some more attractive group, because the standards process, it just stresses, you know, how the politics, and people get up and say things that are clearly technically wrong because their company has a vested interest in the outcome of that particular decision. So, but for faculty who presumably are a little more mature, hopefully so, it is a good thing, because it is a way, you're correct, to drive, at least in my experience, to drive the new ideas into actual wide scale use. But it's a lot of work to be going to all of the standards meetings and creating contributions, so forth. Yeah, go ahead, Jasper.
Yeah, I would echo that. So we have we have looked at a number of ways in the UK in which we can support smaller organizations, including academia, to get involved, or at least to increase knowledge of the standards process, and through our UK Telecoms Innovation Network. We've learned some lessons with that. We will continue in the future to look at opportunities to connect the academic world better in the standard space. But I recognize the challenges, right? It takes a multi-year significant resource investment, and you need to have confidence that you're going to get return on that. I was looking through
and a lot of patience with the other participants.
Indeed, that too. I was looking in the audience whether we still have David Boswarthik from ETSI here, because ETSI is running a he's left. So ETSI is running what is called the ISGs, which are pre-standardization groups, and I think ETSI have done some very useful material on their websites that will help new entrants to build their understanding of how they can engage in the standards making process, including in the pre-standardization work, such as the ISG. So I would point that as probably perhaps the first step that one might consider when looking at standards. And of course, when it comes to funding, we are looking internally in how can we increase attention on the development of IP and patent filing and standards contribution within the research space in relation to the writing of academic papers. That's a live question as well.
But can I say on this that when we are thinking standards in this room, we are mainly thinking 3GPP, and that is a very, very difficult space for academics to make an impact, especially to make an impact in the short term. There are open source initiatives. We talk about softwareization a lot. Open sourcing is really a good place for actually channeling academic contributions. My researchers love it because they go and work within a community, and they can see actually impact and outcomes of the work working in a community. You know, the return is not a standard, but it's a community of influence, which is very important. And my team is working on open source since the days of OpenFlow. That was 2012, 2013. And we have seen actually our code being deployed by very big vendors. And there is, okay, you don't make much money out of this, or this example, although you can make a lot of money out of open source, but it's an impact, and it's an impact that you can record and train your researchers, also make them ready for industry.
So I see one more person with the mic, but I think we're over time here. Oh, we got two mics. Okay, well,
I'd like to just
probably be our last two, and then we'll need to go on time.
I'd
Go ahead.
like to just give one example.
Go ahead.
Where a UK prof has succeeded in 3GPP, and that is Professor Rob Maunder down at Southampton. He developed some coding technology that he wanted to get into 5G. It went through the pilot of the iCure scheme, which was a small funding opportunity through the research councils. He went along to 3GPP and presented it, and there was some interesting discussions about which sort of coding should be used. And because he was an academic, the big players all thought he would be a good impartial person to chair the group in the battle between the big players. His coding did not get accepted into the standard for the main thing that he wanted. However, he did end up developing an extremely good understanding of all the coding schemes, and on the back of that succeeded in creating a company which I think today has secured more than £20 million worth of investment. I think they're in the middle of another raise now, and are about to, they built a sort of their technology into a satellite, NTN, a satellite that has been built by Lockheed Martin, shortly to be launched, with a 5G base station in space. So it can be done by a professor, but he was a singular individual.
It will have been done by the professor. Sorry, I've got a lot of experience in this area. When the investors who invested the £20 million in it, when they get £50 million back, then he'll have succeeded. He's not there yet. So But Ronnie, you'll be
Yeah.
our last one.
I'll just make one comment. I guess there were two parts to the question. One is entrepreneurship. The other is having academia contribute to standards. So I'll make a comment on the second piece, because I don't think there's a lot of funding right now in venture funding going into telecoms, unfortunately. But on the second piece, we also recognize that was a challenge. So the formation of AI RAN Alliance was really trying to, in the platforms I showed earlier, really is trying to get academia using platforms to implement, and then use the weight of that AI RAN Alliance, which is not a standards body, to really implement and show things in the real world, and then take that as a body to the standards bodies. So I think implementation.
That is a great thing,
works.
the Ariel. I've seen it myself
Yeah.
and know Stanford students using it and so forth. It's a good thing. You're correct.